But I will go through all of the horrible things that people have said, and I will answer their questions directly. So let's get straight to that. So let's go back to the beginning, and let me just give you a little bit of context, a little bit of background information, and that is that early December 2021, the whole family is sick at home. And that includes me, my little sister, my stepfather, my grandfather, and my mother. All of us were just really badly sick. We had fevers. I was like puking. It was just total misery. My mother, I would say, had it the worst. We were having like fevers as a family that were like lasting over a week, well over a week, like 8, 9, 10 days, and antibiotics were just not touching it, not doing anything for us. So we were a little freaked out, to say the least. So the way I'm going to present this is I'm going to just show a question, like a typical question that we get as a family, and then I'm going to just respond to it. We did not. This is a common misconception for some reason in this case, but our family did not ask Carrie Madej explicitly to come and administer medical treatment of any kind. The way that this played out was as follows. All of us were sick. My mother was talking to Carrie Madej and letting her know of our condition. Right? My mother was saying, "Hey, this is what's happening. This is how we're feeling. This is how we're feeling." And it was then, at the time, Dr. Madej who offered to come to the house. She was the one who said, "Hey, let me come to your house. I can help you guys. I can check you guys out and make sure you're okay." Right? So initially, my mother was like, "Are you sure? You might get sick yourself." And Madej was like, "No, it's fine. Let me come over. I'll bring you steroids, antibiotics, IVs." She never specified what those IVs were. And our family, my mother, we just sort of said, "Hey, she's offering to come because she's, at the time she was traveling from Ohio to Florida, and where we lived was on the route to where she was going." So we pretty much, I don't even want to say we directly, explicitly accepted it, right? I could say that, but what happened is we just didn't say no. Right? I think that's the more accurate, that's the truthful way to put it. We just didn't say no, and Carrie Madej pretty much ended up just showing up and saying hi. At the time, me personally, when I thought that Madej, because she did say that she was bringing IVs, I personally thought that it was just saline IVs. This is just me speaking personally. So I thought, okay, she's coming over to just bring what is essentially hydration, and I thought, okay, that's fine. It's like everybody around here has a difficult time making themselves an electrolyte drink, so something like that could definitely help. She's a doctor. She knows what she's doing. Why not? This is another myth. We never did. At no point when Madej was speaking to our family before she came to the house did she ever specify other than steroids, antibiotics, IVs, and I also believe ivermectin as well. That is all that she said, right? We did not ask for hydrogen peroxide. This was not the idea of any member of our family. This is basically the idea of Carrie Madej when she came to the house, and she only told us about hydrogen peroxide in the immediate lead up to administering it to my grandfather, stepfather, and my mother. As is stated in my family's civil lawsuit against Carrie Madej, I believe it states this. I'm going off of memory here, but this is true regardless, and that is that Madej never ever gave any. There was never any discussion of the risks of what she was about to do. None at all. She presented herself as a physician who could administer medicine in the state of Tennessee. So this is obviously the next follow-up question. And here's the explanation. I'm going to speak mostly for myself here, but I think it gets the point across regardless. And that is that our family had heard of hydrogen peroxide being used as a therapy. This is not, let me make this clear right now to everybody watching this, that I am in no way defending the use of hydrogen peroxide intravenously or inhaled for that matter. I now know that this is insane and that it needs to be banned. I think it's crazy, right? However, intravenous hydrogen peroxide is being given right now by licensed doctors and licensed nurses in licensed medical facilities throughout the United States. That is happening as you're watching this video right now. It happens all the time in America. This is literally being advertised as a treatment for all kinds of things, right? And I have to preface that by saying that I now know that IV hydrogen peroxide is crazy, right? Go back in time to at the time when this was happening. I had previously only heard that hydrogen peroxide intravenously was used by clinics and things like that. I knew that that was something that doctors and nurses administered, and they are still doing it to this day. So when Madej came to the house, and as she was sitting there preparing the IV bags, one of the things that I did was I did a Google search. I looked up peroxide IV, right? And I actually, let me go ahead and make a cut in this video because that was one thing that I wanted to show off on search results. So here are the Google search results for peroxide IV on December 3rd, 2025. And the reason I highlight the dates is because immediately you are greeted with an AI overview that says that IV hydrogen peroxide is an unproven and potentially dangerous alternative medicine treatment that is not approved by the FDA. Ladies and gentlemen, this AI overview was not a thing on December 5th, 2021. It was not a thing, okay? So this was not there. And then finally, here's another thing, right? Causes of death during intravenous infusion of hydrogen peroxide. Notice the date, 2023. This was not in the search results in 2021. Had it been, then perhaps I would have raised an alarm. Instead, these are the results that essentially that I saw was all the other ones that are not this one dated 2023, obviously, because this was 2021. I saw therapeutic potential of targeting hydrogen peroxide, right? So I just look at the results like that. Okay, seems like it's a study supporting its use, right? Next, what else do you see? The intravenous injection of hydrogen peroxide. Sure, it's a study from 1920, but you can see, I believe I looked at this result back then, that it was used in patients with influenza, right? And then here it is right here, right? Lack of antibacterial activity after intravenous hydrogen peroxide. This was another study that I saw, right? And I also looked at what else it said underneath. The IV administration of hydrogen peroxide has been reported to benefit patients with pneumonia, blah, blah, blah. So these were the results that I was seeing. And what else? Sunshine Healthcare Center, IV hydrogen peroxide therapy. Clinics advertising the use of it. More right here as you scroll through. And as you keep scrolling, that is all you see. Hydrogen peroxide, right? All these IV clinics offering it. This was another study that I saw at the time from 2014. Discover the potential of IV hydrogen peroxide therapy in improving chronic pain. Ladies and gentlemen, what was I supposed to make of this? Right? Because first of all, Carrie Madej was the DO in the room. She was the doctor. All of us were sick. All of us were just totally miserable. And she comes over and she says, hey, let me give you this hydrogen peroxide. All she said, it's perfectly safe. It's going to help you. You guys can all get it. Speaking of my stepfather, my mother, and my grandfather. So we had previously heard of hydrogen peroxide as a therapy. We knew, okay, this is something that these alternative medicine providers, or I shouldn't even say that because they're licensed physicians, right? They're doctors, MDs, and we knew that they give this stuff, right? And so I take the extra step of not just saying, I heard of that. I actually Google searched it. And all the results that I saw was scientific studies supporting its use and clinics advertising it. Okay? Combined with the fact that Carrie Madej was the licensed doctor in the room, I mean, you're going to blame me? You're going to blame my grandfather? You're going to blame the family? Really? The whole point of this is that we were defrauded, right? That is the whole point of this entire case. Another major part of it. And then additionally as well, the two Florida physicians were very well aware of what Dr. Madej at the time had given my grandfather, as well as my mother and my stepfather. And they decided themselves to continue it. They made the decision to continue what Dr. Madej did. And when we told them about hydrogen peroxide, they were like, it's completely fine. Yes, absolutely. And I'm not just saying that because there are videos out there of one of the physicians endorsing the use of hydrogen peroxide. And one of the physicians had a website which directly advertised the fact that they were giving intravenous hydrogen peroxide, right? So of the two Florida physicians who also killed my grandfather, one of them was advertising that they gave it themselves to patients on their website, and the other one is on video, on public video, endorsing the use of hydrogen peroxide. So not only did we have the Carrie Madej there, but you also have two other licensed still to this day. I'm getting angry, right? Licensed still to this day by the state of Florida. And they were also there saying hydrogen peroxide is completely fine, that it's completely safe. And there were other doctors as well in the circle of what I would say was that, I don't know what you would want to call it, the COVID movement or whatever. I don't know what you'd call it. There were other doctors as well who were basically in that video that I showed in my previous video, you can see Dr. Christiane Northrup discussing hydrogen peroxide with Carrie Madej. Okay? So all around us, we were surrounded by doctors, by physicians saying, this is fine. And then there's different sort of POVs, so to speak, in the family, right? When Madej came to the house, because my mother was not even aware that my grandfather had received hydrogen peroxide until after he had already received it, right? And when she found out, once again, it wasn't like we were alarmed because we were like, oh, we heard of that before, okay. And then here are a bunch of doctors around us saying that it's completely fine. We had absolutely no idea that Carrie Madej, and I need to make this point as well because it is important, and that is that the dosage of this, because patients have been given and are being given intravenous hydrogen peroxide, just focusing on the intravenous part, right? And the dosage that is given to them is so low. I believe it's like 1 milliliter, right? And I don't endorse that. I need to make it very clear that I don't endorse that. I think this shit needs to be banned. I think that there needs to be nationwide attention on all these clinics and doctors doing this horrible thing because this is not medicine, and I know that now. My point is that patients are being given this amount of hydrogen peroxide in IVs. We had no idea that Carrie Madej essentially poisoned my grandfather with a dosage that even physicians who our family personally spoke to, who they themselves had done this type of IV hydrogen peroxide therapy onto patients before, when we told them the dosage that Madej did, they were horrified and saying that was nowhere, it was way beyond the dosage that even they did doing this type of thing. And on the nebulization part as well, same story. We had no idea. We did not know anything about these dosages or anything like that. And you had all these physicians around us who were endorsing it. And even on the dosage part as well, How, like, just of course, I keep saying, how are we supposed to know? It's like when you go to a doctor or to a hospital or to a medical clinic, do you sit there as the doctor or nurse is sticking a needle in your arm and you ask, hey doc, are you sure that this is 10 milliliters and not 50 milliliters of methyl diacylocone benzyl phenamine diltroxide? No, you don't. You just trust the doctor. My grandfather was a patient. My mother and my stepfather were patients. And our family trusted the doctor in the room. Period. We didn't trust herbalists or some naturopaths. We trusted licensed medical doctors. In the case of Madej, of course, there's the added layer of her being a fraud because she was not licensed to practice medicine in Tennessee. And we knew at the time nothing about medical licensing laws. We were under the impression that she could come and do whatever it is that she was going to do. We were just thinking, okay, she's a doctor, so she knows what she can and can't do. And when it comes to the Florida doctors, they are still licensed to this day, ladies and gentlemen. They are still posing an active danger and threat to the safety of the public. And it's not just the fact that we trusted the doctors. In this case, we literally trusted the Florida Board of Medicine. There's that additional thing to point out. We didn't just trust the doctors. We trusted the Florida Medical Board because they are the ones who give the authority to these physicians to practice medicine. Both Madej and the Florida doctors were administering conventional medicine. By the way, I need to make that point as well, because some people like to say that we sought out alternative care. They like to start getting into these crazy semantic games. That's really, when it comes to the fact that my grandfather was taken to the two Florida physicians, that's really, and I'm speaking specifically in regards to that, it's really not as accurate. It's really not as accurate to say that we wanted alternative care than to just say that we wanted outpatient care, right? That my grandfather wanted outpatient care like many Americans during COVID-19. All three doctors were giving antibiotics, steroids, painkillers, ivermectin. All of this is conventional medicine. So let's just make things clear for these three claims, right? People saying, why did you ask for Carrie Madej to come? We didn't ask for her to come. Why did you ask for hydrogen peroxide? We did not. The claim of us agreeing to hydrogen peroxide doesn't matter in this case. Like, that's literally it literally, legally speaking, is a stupid, irrelevant question because there was no informed consent. So it doesn't matter. That question doesn't literally, legally does not matter because there was no informed consent. And then on the question of why, of course, or on this accusation, I should say, that we sought out hydrogen peroxide that some people have told us, that first of all, not only is that just not true, even if it was true, it doesn't matter because once again, Madej is the physician and the patients are not responsible, right? It would be Madej's job in that case to say, no, I can't do this for you. That's crazy, right? The responsibility is with Carrie Madej. I say this because as this series go on, you will learn of what I'm about to explain, and that is that somebody in this case, who I don't want to say involved, but somebody who's in this case, all right, the case of my grandfather, I won't name them right now, who was not a direct witness to what happened. And I need to make that very clear. Somebody who was not a witness to what happened made a claim in writing that had absolutely zero evidence behind it, saying that, and it was basically just a hearsay statement, which basically it means that the individual I'm speaking of said that somebody told them that we sought out hydrogen peroxide, and they did not even specify who that somebody was. And that's because there was no somebody who said that to them in the first place. And that same individual has since realized that and took back that statement because there's no evidence whatsoever to say that we sought out hydrogen peroxide. We did not. And that individual I am speaking of acknowledges that as of now, as of this date. I'm saying it vaguely, but as this series continues, just bookmark this part of the video so that way you see I am trying to be as transparent as possible, and more information will come out as time goes on and as I make more videos. This claim that we sought out hydrogen peroxide is not only without evidence, but we literally have evidence that directly disproves that accusation. And what makes the victim blaming, that's what makes the victim blaming from the part of the authorities in Tennessee, mainly in Tennessee, you'll see what I mean in future videos, but Florida too. That's what makes their victim blaming so much more sinister. Because they were given that evidence which directly disproves this notion that we purposefully called Madej over to come specifically give hydrogen peroxide, while knowing that it was somehow poisonous, which is just absolutely and totally false and insane narrative, as I think I've sufficiently demonstrated that here, that is bullshit. This is the other big question or claim that other people make, and let's take this one step at a time. First of all, my grandfather was with his own mind. By the way, I just want to say we're specifically speaking here about when Carrie Madej left the house, right? And the decision to drive my grandfather to the 2 Florida physicians. First of all, that is what my grandfather wanted. My grandfather did not want to go to the hospital. And more important context, my grandfather and us as his family, we had absolutely no idea that Carrie Madej had just poisoned him. As my grandfather's condition declined, his symptoms looked as though he was having a worsening of his viral or infectious flu-like illness. That is essentially what it looked like. He started coughing a lot more. He had a fever still. He was complaining of pain in his throat, and he had difficulty taking things like Tylenol to control his fever. We literally asked him and said, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" And he himself said, "No, I want to go to the 2 Florida physicians." And the reason is, and I'm going to keep elaborating on the reason here. The reason is because both of the Florida physicians, they didn't just offer treatment to my grandfather. They were literally asking us as the family, saying, "Bring him to us." So the 2 Florida physicians were literally saying, "Bring him down to Gulf Breeze, Florida." That is what they said. So not only do you have that, which are physicians that he trusted, okay? And then the sort of big overarching reason is, why was our family afraid of the hospital, right? Because there was a fear, right? I need to make it clear that despite that fear, we were still considering going to the hospital as a family. We were talking to my grandfather about it, and there is literal evidence as well. There's evidence showing that we were discussing going to the hospital. And I think that this now comes down to the core reason here of why we were afraid of the hospital. Why were we scared? Why was my grandfather scared? First of all, in general, my grandfather was afraid of doctors and hospitals. That is because my grandma, his wife, was a victim of medical malpractice. She was killed by a doctor in a hospital in, I believe it was only 6 weeks after I was born. And pretty much the story, I don't want to waste too much time on it. The story is that the physician at the hospital, after my grandmother had surgery, forgot to give her blood thinning medication, and she ended up dying of an unnecessary blood clot due to that fumble that the physician made. So my grandfather already from his life experience was very afraid and wanted to be away, generally speaking, from hospitals as well and doctors. That sort of thing scared him. Let's keep expanding upon this, right? Additionally, my grandfather was hospitalized a month before Carrie Madej came for a completely unrelated condition. Okay, I have to say that because I go back to the autopsy report of Dr. Schultz, who clearly listed what the cause of death was for my grandfather. Our family was scared of hospitals during the time of COVID-19. And the reason was because of specific COVID-19 hospital protocols that were taking place. Now, there's layers to this. The current health secretary of the United States, RFK Jr., regardless of what you think of him, that's the point. I'm not trying to debate whether he's right or wrong or good or bad, but I'm just pointing out that the current health secretary of the United States of America, that he has a platform called Children's Health Defense, which regularly platforms people who claimed that COVID-19 hospital protocols killed their family members. And these hospital protocols were unnecessarily intubating patients on ventilators when they did not have to be intubated on ventilators, administrations of drugs such as remdesivir, right? This was a controversial drug, and you can go look this up. There were many lawsuits that were attempted to be filed for medical malpractice against healthcare companies for administering remdesivir to patients without any informed consent, et cetera, et cetera. And these lawsuits failed because of a crazy federal law. I'll link maybe some of this stuff in the description, but of a federal law that basically was in action during COVID-19, where healthcare providers could essentially use any quickly emergency approved drug by the FDA, something like that, that they could do that without any consequences whatsoever, legally speaking. And one of the drugs that they used was remdesivir, and this drug caused controversy. So that was the administration of this drug. As I said, the unnecessary intubation of patients who went to the hospital presenting symptoms of COVID-19, and the isolation of these patients from their family members. Now, this is something I think is more easily understood by the public, because if you ever went to a hospital during the times of COVID-19, you would know that this was real. Hospitals would literally isolate patients, not just for COVID-19, but even just for perceived COVID-19. If you came in there with a fever or anything like that, they would isolate you. Okay? Like they would say, your family cannot see you. Or they would tell families that you cannot see your loved one. These protocols terrified many Americans, and it terrified our family. And here are some mainstream media articles, by the way, that I will be linking in the description. Here's one from USA Today. Fact check. Hospitals get paid more if patients listed as COVID-19 and on ventilators. And let's just scroll down to the part where they say whether it's how they rate the claim. All the ads here, goodness. Hold on. Right here. We rate the claim that hospitals get paid more if patients are listed as COVID-19 and on ventilators as true. Hospitals and doctors do get paid more for Medicare patients diagnosed with COVID-19, or if it's considered presumes that they have COVID-19 absent a laboratory confirmed test, and 3 times more if the patients are placed on a ventilator to cover the cost of care and loss of blah, blah, blah. Ladies and gentlemen, if a hospital put a patient and diagnosed them as COVID-19 and put them on a ventilator, they got massive payouts, okay? Anybody who is aware of how the world works, okay, knows that this is crazy suspicious, okay? Like, I don't care if you're right or left, everybody should know that the defense that, oh, well, doctors are so ethical, they would never purposefully decide to kill a few people on these ventilators to get extra money. Like, I'm sorry, but you're the one who's crazy if you actually accept that. But regardless, right? You can see why. You can see where this fear comes from, right? And not only that, and additionally, because I saw this article before, my grandfather was on Medicare. Okay, so that's another thing. My grandfather was on Medicare, and he knew of everything that you're reading on your screen right now himself, which also contributed to his fear. Here's another article, and this was a very popular article from the Washington Post in New York's largest hospital system. Most patients on ventilators don't make it, and this was the initial alarming article that I'm sure everybody remembers from this time, where about 88%, I forgot where it is, 88% of the patients who went on ventilators died. Almost 90%, right? So let's connect these two articles together. Most of the patients who went on these ventilators died, right? I believe that the numbers were later revised to something smaller, but still, it's like even if it was 50%, do you really want to put your life in the hands of a coin toss? Be honest, okay? So you have the fact that it was knowledge at the time that over 80% of patients on ventilators died. And hospitals got huge bonuses for putting patients on ventilators and just diagnosing them as COVID-19. So make of that information what you will. I have to stress, and I'm not trying to convince people of a position. You can disagree with that all you want. My point is do you see why we were scared? So not only do you have these mainstream media reports and plenty of alternative media reports, but all of the physicians involved in my grandfather's care, okay, that is the 2 Florida physicians and Dr. Madej at the time, were all saying, don't go to a hospital. All of them were advising against it. The 2 Florida physicians explicitly said, don't go to a hospital, bring him here to us. They were basically constantly telling us, if your grandfather goes to a hospital, they will kill him. And then I hope you follow, because I know I'm bad about getting off track a little bit sometimes. But back to the hospitalization that my grandfather did have a month prior. He had a horrible experience. I will not name the hospital because this isn't about them, right? But my grandfather went to a Tennessee hospital for an unrelated condition that he needed emergency care for, right? A completely fixable condition that needed emergency attention. He went to the emergency room. The physicians there, or the hospital staff, were wanting to give my grandfather a test for COVID-19 and saying that if he tested positive, they were going to isolate him from the family and that we would not be able to see him. So you can already see, with us being told by physicians around us that this situation was dangerous, with the media reports, and with the fact, by the way, that we have personal friends of ours, or personal, I shouldn't say ours because I'm not necessarily me, right? But of the family, like my mother and my stepfather, they have acquaintances, both friends and people they knew, who alleged that these COVID-19 hospital protocols killed their loved ones. So I don't stray too much off topic on what I was saying about my grandfather's previous hospitalization, and that is that they were basically saying, we're going to isolate him. My grandfather said, I am not going to do it. I refuse. I'm signing out. Like, bye-bye. I'm not going. The hospital almost denied my grandfather life-saving emergency medical care that he needed at the time desperately because of their COVID-19 protocols. And the only reason that my grandfather got the emergency care that he needed at the time was because a courageous physician, who I will not name, and I'm not naming the hospital for his sake as well, he refused to go by their protocols. It was like a miracle. He was on shift at the time, and he said, we're going to admit him anyway. Much to the dismay of the hospital staff and the nurses and all that. They were saying, he was literally saying, he's not COVID-19. Like, he doesn't even have a fever at the time, right? And he admitted him. He was the only physician there who actually had a commitment to his Hippocratic oath. And he admitted my grandfather because he was literally saying, if you go home and you don't get this care, you're going to die. And that physician, who I am so thankful for, it gets me a little emotional, said, don't worry, we're going to bypass this protocol. Like, just bring him in. I'll treat him. And he did. And he saved my grandfather's life. But while my grandfather was there was arguments with the hospital staff. And one, I don't know if it was a nurse or another staff member, directly threatened my grandfather and said that if he came back to the hospital while the doctor was not on shift, that was the implication, or that if my grandfather came back to the hospital and had any signs of a fever, that staff member literally said, then we are going to forcefully isolate him. Like, we're going to isolate him. So you can see why my grandfather wasn't enthusiastic to go back there when he ended up having a fever. And why, when these two other Florida physicians who offered outpatient care for what we thought was a worsening of his viral/flu-like symptoms, how are you really going to blame us? You're really going to blame him? Really? For wanting outpatient care. We had no idea he was poisoned. No idea. Not in the slightest. He was transferred to the care of two licensed Florida physicians, still licensed to this day. He was coherent when he arrived. He was talking. He was discussing with my stepfather, because my stepfather was the one who drove him. Specific details, like at first me and my mother stayed at the home in Tennessee, and it was my stepfather and my little sister in the car who drove my grandfather down, and they were discussing his care. So he arrived completely with his mind, and somehow the blame is on us as the family, because my grandfather chose, and we respected his wish, to go to outpatient care compared to a hospital that had literally threatened him previously. Outpatient care for what we thought was, as I said, a worsening of his flu-like symptoms. And by the way, that's another thing that was also being told by us, by these doctors, and also being reported on. A notable physician, and this physician has nothing to do with this case. Let me just make that clear. This is a physician named Dr. Peter McCullough. I bring up his name because he became very popular during COVID-19 for his perspectives. I believe he testified before Congress. And he was somebody who, I don't know if he published studies or he was circulating studies. Don't quote me 100% on that. He was basically citing studies, and these are studies that I will link in the description as well, showing that patients who chose outpatient care for COVID-19 or other flu-like symptoms fared significantly better than those who went to the hospital. So that was another thing that contributed to my grandfather and us as the family saying, let's go get outpatient care. And finally, as I mentioned before, our family personally knew of and knew people, right? There was somebody who's a follower of my stepfather's ministry who has contact with my mother, who was literally who was telling my mother that her sister was isolated. And I think that sort of made it clear why us as a family were afraid to go to the hospital. And despite all of that, we still were willing. There is literally, it sounds crazy, but we were still sort of like feeling like we were in a position at the time discussing that we might have had no other choice but to go ahead. And basically, we were like trying to tell my grandfather that he seemed to be getting so bad off that he might eventually end up having to go to the hospital. And we were basically sort of, it's on evidence. We were basically considering it, and he was considering it, despite we were trying to come up with ways of, could we speak to the doctors somehow? Could we speak to hospital staff? And what ended up happening is the two Florida physicians came in and said, don't go, bring him here. So at the time, how did they not seem like angels to us and to him? The family and my grandfather has absolutely no blame here in this matter. And shame on you if you think that we do, because I personally am sick of it. I'm done with the victim blaming. Go read that article on victim blaming that I will link in the description here. I've been ranting a lot here. I'm going to try and edit this together to make it coherent. We've spoken to many attorneys. We've spoken to many attorneys, both in Tennessee and in Florida, who have told this exact same thing to us, saying that they cannot believe that us as the victims are being blamed, that we are being victim blamed and victim shamed, and that it's outrageous. And it's just, it also hurts. It hurts. I try not so much when the public says it, because frankly, and I hate to say this, but I don't give a shit if people want to still, despite hearing the facts that I've laid forth in this video today, I don't give a shit if you're going to sit there and still attack us. Because if you're doing that, you're just plain insane. But it hurts when it comes from authorities who should know better and who are supposed to be doing their job. And that's why my next videos are going to be about the incompetence and the horrible reactions that we've received from prosecutors in the state of Tennessee and prosecutors in the state of Florida. Stay tuned. I'm Ethan Suto.